I'm Amber Reynolds, 26 years old, and last Christmas changed my life forever. One minute I was passing mashed potatoes around a table filled with family, the next I was homeless. My father's exact words still ring in my ears: "You're a leech, you can't stay here anymore." Jobless and broke, I walked out that night with nowhere to go, utterly blindsided by his cruelty. What I didn't know then was that his devastating rejection would be the painful gift that forced me to discover my true strength. If you're watching from somewhere your family let you down too, hit like and subscribe while I share how I went from homeless on Christmas to finding my true worth. Growing up with my father, Richard, was like walking on eggshells scattered across a minefield. He was an accountant by profession and a perfectionist by nature, with expectations that reached far beyond what any child could reasonably achieve. A 95 on a test wasn't celebration worthy, it was cause for the inevitable question: what happened to the other 5%? Second place in anything was just the first loser in his eyes. My mother, Grace, had been the buffer between his harsh standards and my developing self-esteem. She'd whisper encouragements when he wasn't looking and sneak ice cream after particularly brutal criticism sessions. But when I turned 12, breast cancer took her after an 18-month battle that drained our family emotionally and financially. Her absence left a gaping hole that neither my father nor I knew how to fill. For 3 years it was just the two of us in a house that felt increasingly empty. I tried everything to earn his approval: perfect grades, extracurricular activities, cooking dinners, keeping the house spotless. Nothing seemed to thaw the ice that had settled around his heart after Mom died. When I was 15, Diane entered our lives. She was different from my mother in every way: corporate, polished, and as rigid as my father. They met at a business conference where she was representing her law firm. After a whirlwind 6-month courtship, she moved into our home with her designer wardrobe and minimalist aesthetic that seemed to erase the last traces of my mother's warmth. "This place needed updating anyway," she commented while supervising the removal of Mom's floral curtains and family photos. I tried to be open-minded for my father's sake. Perhaps Diane made him happy in ways I couldn't understand, but from the beginning there was an unspoken competition between us. She viewed me as a reminder of my father's previous life, and I viewed her as an intruder trying to rewrite our family history. 4 years after their marriage, my half-brother Trevor was born. He became the reset button my father had been waiting for: a clean slate, untainted by the memory of my mother or the grief that had colored our relationship. Trevor grew up with advantages I never had: private schools, expensive summer camps, and most importantly, my father's undivided pride and attention. Trevor got accepted to the robotics program, my father would announce at family gatherings, beaming with pride. My own achievements, making the dean's list at state college or winning a local design competition, barely registered as footnotes in family conversation. Despite the emotional distance, I had managed to forge my own path. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a graphic design firm in the city, moved into a small apartment with 2 roommates, and gradually built a life independent from my father's shadow. I wasn't making much, but I was making it on my own, and that felt like victory enough. Then came the economic downturn. The startup where I'd been working for almost 2 years went under with barely 2 weeks' notice. My position as their lead graphic designer vanished along with my steady paycheck. My roommates had just signed a lease on a more expensive place, assuming I'd be moving in with my boyfriend Jake, but our relationship had imploded the same week as my job loss when I discovered texts from someone named Marissa on his phone. Suddenly I was jobless, homeless, and heartbroken, the trifecta of 20-something disaster. After exhausting my meager savings on hotel rooms and realizing how competitive the job market had become, I swallowed my pride and called my father. "It's just temporary," I assured him during that awkward phone call, "just until I find another position. 3 months tops." He sighed heavily before agreeing, and I could almost hear the disappointment weighing down his words. "Your old room is still available. Diane uses it for her yoga sometimes, but she can move her equipment." Moving back felt like sliding backward down a mountain I'd been climbing for years. Each box I unpacked in my childhood bedroom seemed to erase another year of independence. Diane's reception was as chilly as expected. "We were thinking of converting this into a proper home gym," she mentioned while watching me unpack. "Trevor needs the space for his training. He's trying out for varsity wrestling this year." From day one, I tried to be the least intrusive presence possible. I woke up early to job hunt, spending hours tailoring resumes and writing cover letters at the local library or coffee shops to avoid being in the house during the day. I took over cooking dinner most nights, cleaned the kitchen daily, and even did Trevor's laundry when I did mine. I was determined to contribute in any way I could. But as weeks stretched into months, I could feel my welcome wearing thinner. The job market was brutal. I'd had a few promising interviews that led nowhere. The freelance design work I managed to secure barely covered my phone bill and student loan payment. There's a position at my friend Martin's insurance office, my father mentioned over breakfast one morning. Answering phones, filing paperwork, not exactly what you went to school for, but it's something. The suggestion stung. 4 years of design school and 2 years of professional experience reduced to answering phones. But beggars couldn't be choosers, so I went to the interview. Martin, my father's golf buddy, spent the entire meeting talking about how he was doing my father a favor and offering a salary that wouldn't even cover my loan payments. I left feeling more defeated than before. As November turned to December, tension in the house reached a breaking point. My father's comments grew increasingly pointed. When I was your age, I was already an associate at the firm with a mortgage and a family on the way. Diane would chime in with helpful observations. My niece Sarah just bought her first condo. She says the market is actually quite accessible if you're smart with your money. Even Trevor, normally absorbed in his own teenage world, picked up on the dynamic. Dad says you're going through a failure to launch phase, he informed me casually one evening while I was helping him with his math homework. The only bright spot was my Aunt Jessica, my mother's sister, who called regularly to check on me. Your father was always a hard man, she said during one of our conversations. Grace knew how to soften him. Just hang in there, honey, the right opportunity will come. I clung to her encouragement like a life raft as Christmas approached. Maybe the holiday spirit would ease some of the tension. I volunteered to handle the decorations, pulling out the old ornaments my mother had collected and arranging them on the tree while Diane was at work. For a brief moment, hanging the delicate glass snowflake Mom had bought the year before she died, I felt a connection to happier times. Then Diane came home. Oh, she said, surveying my work, I thought we agreed on the silver and blue theme this year. These old decorations are a bit eclectic, don't you think? By Christmas Eve I was walking on eggshells again. The extended family would be arriving the next day, Aunt Jessica and Uncle Paul, my cousins Rachel and Ryan. I hoped their presence might dilute some of the tension that had been building. If only I had known what was coming, I might have packed my bags that night and saved myself the humiliation that awaited me at the Christmas dinner table. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow blanketing our suburban neighborhood. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the picture-perfect holiday scene. Instead, I woke with a knot of anxiety in my stomach that had become my constant companion. I headed downstairs early to help with dinner preparations, determined to make myself useful. Diane was already in the kitchen, surrounded by ingredients and wearing the cranberry-colored apron she reserved for special occasions. There you are, she said, barely looking up from her list. You can start peeling the potatoes. There are 20 pounds there. We'll need them all with your Uncle Paul's appetite. For the next 6 hours I chopped, peeled, stirred and basted alongside my stepmother in a kitchen dance that was more military drill than familial bonding. Still, I was grateful for the distraction of physical work. Diane was a stickler for tradition, insisting that everything be made from scratch. No store-bought rolls or canned cranberry sauce would ever grace her holiday table. Your father expects perfection, she reminded me, as if I needed any clarification on that point after 26 years as Richard Reynolds' daughter. Trevor wandered in occasionally to sample the goods, earning playful swats from Diane and indulgent smiles that she never directed my way. Save some room for dinner, champion, she cooed when he snagged a deviled egg from the appetizer tray. By 4 o'clock, the house filled with delicious aromas and the sounds of arriving family. Aunt Jessica was the first through the door, her arms laden with colorfully wrapped presents and her smile warm enough to momentarily melt the frost that had settled over the house. Amber, she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug that smelled of her signature vanilla perfume. Look at you, beautiful as ever. How are you holding up? The question carried weight that only I understood. Hanging in there, I whispered back, helping her with her coat. Uncle Paul followed with my cousins Rachel and Ryan in tow. Rachel, now in her final year of nursing school, immediately launched into stories about her clinical rotations, while Ryan, 2 years younger and perpetually laid back, made a beeline for the appetizers. My father emerged from his study where he'd been conveniently absent during all the cooking chaos. Freshly showered and wearing the cashmere sweater I'd given him last Christmas, he played the role of gracious host, offering drinks and hearty handshakes to the men while kissing cheeks of the women. Richard, the house looks lovely, Aunt Jessica commented, though I noticed her eyes lingering on the silver and blue decorations that had replaced my mother's treasured ornaments. All Diane's doing, my father replied, placing a possessive hand on my stepmother's lower back. She has quite the eye for design. I bit my tongue, remembering the hours I'd spent with the original decorations before they were deemed unsuitable. Dinner was served at exactly 5:30, with everyone finding their assigned seats around the formal dining table. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier light, and the fine china that only appeared on holidays was arranged with mathematical precision. I took my place between Ryan and Rachel, directly across from my father at the head of the table. For the first hour, everything progressed with carefully choreographed pleasantness. We passed serving dishes, complimented the food, and engaged in the type of surface-level conversation that characterizes many family gatherings. My father was on his third glass of wine, his cheeks slightly flushed as he recounted Trevor's latest wrestling victory. "The coach says he's a natural athlete," he boasted, "probably looking at a scholarship if he keeps this trajectory." "That's wonderful," Aunt Jessica said, then turned to me with deliberate inclusivity. "And Amber, how's the job hunt going? Any promising leads?" A brief silence fell over the table. I felt every eye turn in my direction as I swallowed a bite of turkey that suddenly tasted like cardboard. "A few possibilities," I answered, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I had a good interview with a marketing firm last week. They said they'd be in touch after the holidays." "It's a tough market right now," Uncle Paul chimed in kindly. "My company had to downsize our graphic design department too. Nothing personal, just business decisions." "She's been looking for 3 months now," my father interjected, refilling his wine glass. 3 months living here, eating our food, using our utilities." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Diane placed a warning hand on my father's arm, but he shrugged it off. "I've been contributing," I said quietly, aware of how defensive I sounded. "I cook, I clean, I..." "Playing house isn't contributing," my father cut me off, his voice taking on the edge that always preceded his worst moments. "You're 26 years old, Amber, when I was your age." "We know, Richard," Aunt Jessica interrupted gently. "Different times, different economy." But my father was building up steam, years of disappointment finding their target. "No, Jessica, stop making excuses for her. This isn't about the economy. This is about drive, about determination, about not being a leech on society." The word hung in the air like a slap. "Leech." I stared at my plate, unable to look up at the faces around the table. "Richard," Uncle Paul cautioned, "it's Christmas. Let's keep things..." "No, I've had enough," my father continued, his voice rising. "I've kept quiet for months, watching her lounge around, sending out the occasional resume, acting like she's entitled to free room and board indefinitely." "Dad," Trevor said uncomfortably, "Amber helps out a lot." "Stay out of this, Trevor," my father snapped before turning back to me. His next words came out with surgical precision. "You're a leech, Amber, a disappointment. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." Gasps echoed around the table. Invoking my mother crossed a line he'd never dared breach before. "Richard," Aunt Jessica exclaimed. But he wasn't finished. "You can't stay here anymore. I want you out by New Year's. Find an apartment, find a shelter, I don't care, but this free ride is over." The silence that followed was absolute. I looked up finally, surveying the faces around the table. Aunt Jessica's horrified expression, Uncle Paul's discomfort, my cousin's embarrassment, Trevor's wide eyes, and Diane's carefully neutral face that couldn't quite hide her satisfaction. With mechanical movements, I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten dinner and stood. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. No one stopped me as I walked upstairs to my room. No, not my room anymore, just the space I'd been temporarily occupying. With each step, my father's words echoed: Leech, disappointment, ashamed. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed and began packing methodically, clothes, toiletries, laptop, portfolio. What else could I fit in my car? What else did I even have worth taking? Downstairs, I could hear the awkward resumption of dinner conversation, utensils clinking against plates as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been eviscerated and exiled at Christmas dinner. 20 minutes later, I dragged my suitcase downstairs. The dining room fell silent again as I passed the doorway. "I'll be gone in 5 minutes, I announced to no one in particular. My father didn't look up from his plate. Diane studied her wineglass with sudden interest. Only Trevor half rose from his seat before my father's hand on his arm stopped him. "Amber, don't be hasty," Uncle Paul said, standing. "It's Christmas night. Where will you go?" "I'll figure it out," I replied, the reality of my situation not fully registering yet. As I headed toward the front door, I heard a chair scrape back. Aunt Jessica appeared in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed. "Wait," she said, digging through her purse. She pressed $500 bills into my hand. "It's not much, but it'll help until you figure things out. Call me tomorrow, promise." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She pulled me into a fierce hug. "You are not what he said," she whispered fiercely. "You are Grace's daughter. Never forget that." With those words ringing in my ears, I walked out into the snowy Christmas night, my future as uncertain as the dark road ahead of me. The first night was surreal. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, windshield wipers pushing away snow and tears as I processed what had just happened. Eventually, practicality overcame shock. I needed a place to sleep. Hotels were beyond my budget, with only Aunt Jessica's $500 between me and complete destitution. After considering my options, I pulled into a Walmart parking lot. I'd heard it was a place where people could park overnight without being hassled. I reclined my seat as far as it would go, bundled up in my winter coat, and tried to sleep. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees that night. I woke every half hour, shivering, starting my car briefly to run the heater before turning it off to conserve gas. By morning, my back ached, my mouth felt like sandpaper, and the reality of my situation hit me with full force. "I'm homeless," I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that stared back looked pale and unfamiliar. That first day established the pattern for many that followed. I used the bathroom at Walmart to brush my teeth and wash my face, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while avoiding the pitying glances of the early morning shoppers. I bought a cheap coffee from the McDonald's inside and used their Wi-Fi to check my email. No responses to any of my job applications. I spent that day at the public library, using their computers to send out more resumes and search for affordable housing options. Everything seemed impossibly expensive. Even the most rundown studio apartments required first and last month's rent plus security deposit, easily $2,000 I didn't have. As evening approached, the librarian announced closing time. I had nowhere to go but back to my car and another frigid night in the Walmart parking lot. By day 3, I realized I needed a better system. I joined a budget gym with monthly membership fees of just $30. It gave me access to hot showers and a place to spend a few hours each day in warmth. I found a laundromat where I could wash my increasingly limited wardrobe once a week. I learned which fast food restaurants had the cheapest menu items and which coffee shops would let me nurse a single cup for hours while using their Wi-Fi. Still, Aunt Jessica's money disappeared alarmingly fast. Gas, food, gym membership, phone bill, the basic necessities of survival consumed nearly half of it in the first week. I started skipping meals, limiting myself to one small food purchase per day and supplementing with free condiment packets when no one was looking. The hunger was constant, a gnawing companion to the humiliation and fear. Each morning I checked my email with diminishing hope. Rejection after rejection filled my inbox. "We've decided to pursue other candidates. The position has been filled. We'll keep your resume on file." Empty phrases that offered no path forward. 2 weeks after Christmas, a small ray of hope appeared. A local restaurant was looking for someone to design a new menu and logo. The pay was minimal, just $300 for the entire project, but it was something. I worked on the designs from the library computers, pouring all my creativity and desperation into creating something impressive. The restaurant owner loved it, paid me in cash, and even threw in a few free meal vouchers. That small success sustained me emotionally more than financially. It reminded me that I still had skills, still had value, despite my father's cruel assessment. But as January progressed, my situation grew more precarious. I called Aunt Jessica weekly, downplaying my circumstances while she offered encouragement and promises to send more money when she could. I knew Uncle Paul's construction business was struggling too, and I couldn't bring myself to ask for more help. I reached out to friends cautiously, embarrassed to reveal the full extent of my predicament. Most offered sympathetic words but little practical assistance. A few let me crash on their couches for a night or two, but no one had room for a permanent houseguest. I couldn't blame them. We were all struggling 20-somethings trying to establish ourselves in a difficult economy. "You can stay through the weekend," my college friend Jenna offered when I finally broke down and explained my situation. "But my boyfriend's moving in on Monday and we don't have space for—" "I understand," I assured her quickly. "The weekend is more than enough." Those brief respites from my car were precious. A real bed, a kitchen, human conversation, simple comforts that I'd once taken for granted now felt like extraordinary luxuries. By the 1-month mark, disaster struck again. My car, my home, my only asset, began making an ominous clicking sound whenever I started it. One morning it refused to start at all. The mechanic's diagnosis was grim. The alternator was shot, and the repair would cost over $600. "I can't afford that," I told him, panic rising in my throat. "Well, you can't drive it like this," he replied with a shrug. Battery won't charge. You'll be stranded anywhere you go. I sat in the repair shop waiting room, trying to control my breathing as I confronted this new crisis. Without my car, I lost not only my transportation but my shelter. The remaining money from Aunt Jessica wouldn't cover both the repair and a few nights at even the cheapest motel. That afternoon, I found myself in the bathroom of a small diner near the repair shop, crying silently in the stall. I'd reached the end of my resources, both financial and emotional. My father's words echoed in my head: Leech, disappointment. The worst part was that in that moment of absolute despair, I almost believed him. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, eyes red and face blotchy, I found the waitress watching me with concern. Melissa was her name. According to her name tag, a woman perhaps 10 years older than me, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, placing a cup of hot tea in front of me that I hadn't ordered. "I'm fine," I lied automatically, "just allergies." She raised an eyebrow. "In January?" Something about her direct gaze broke through my last defenses. The whole story came pouring out: the Christmas dinner, the car, the homelessness, all of it. I expected pity or awkward discomfort. Instead, she listened intently, occasionally nodding as if my story wasn't so unusual. When I finished, she refilled my tea. "My brother Brian works at Horizon Marketing downtown. They're always looking for freelancers, and my couch pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, but it's yours until you get on your feet." I stared at her, unable to process this unexpected kindness from a complete stranger. "Why would you help me?" I asked finally. "You don't even know me." Melissa's smile held a hint of old pain. 3 years ago, that was me sitting where you are. Someone helped me when I had nowhere else to turn. Now I'm paying it forward. That night, I slept on Melissa's pull-out couch in her tiny one-bedroom apartment, my first real night's sleep in a month. As I drifted off, I realized that rock bottom had a strange gift to offer. When you've lost everything, you discover who you truly are, and sometimes who others are too. Melissa's apartment became my temporary sanctuary. It was small, barely 700 square feet, with mismatched furniture and faded posters on the walls, but it felt like a palace after a month of living in my car. "House rules are simple," Melissa explained that first morning over instant coffee. "Keep your stuff tidy, clean up after yourself in the bathroom, and no bringing strangers home. I work doubles on weekends, so you'll have the place to yourself then." I was determined not to abuse her kindness. While she was at work, I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, organized her chaotic kitchen cabinets, and even fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom with a YouTube tutorial and tools borrowed from her neighbor. When she returned that evening to find her apartment transformed, she laughed. "I didn't bring you here to be my maid, Amber." "I know," I replied, "but I need to contribute somehow, at least until I can pay actual rent." True to her word, Melissa arranged an introduction to her brother Brian. He worked as an account manager at Horizon Marketing, a mid-sized agency that handled mostly local businesses. "They're not hiring full-time right now," he warned me as we met for coffee near his office, "but they do farm out overflow design work to freelancers. The pay isn't great, but it's steady if you're reliable." I showed him my portfolio on my laptop, watching anxiously as he scrolled through my work. Despite my efforts to appear professional, I was acutely aware of my wrinkled clothes and the dark circles under my eyes. "You're good," he said finally. "Different style than what they usually go for, but that might be a good thing, fresh perspective." 2 days later, I had my first assignment, designing a series of social media graphics for a local credit union. The project paid just $200, but it was a foot in the door. I worked on it at the public library, putting in extra hours to make sure every pixel was perfect. The client loved the work, and Brian passed along another project the following week. It wasn't enough to live on, but combined with odd jobs I picked up through apps, walking dogs, delivering groceries, running errands for elderly neighbors, I was slowly building a financial foundation. After 3 weeks at Melissa's, I had saved enough to contribute to groceries and utilities. After 6 weeks, I was able to get my car repaired, regaining my independence even if I no longer needed it as shelter. I found a place, I told Melissa one evening in late February. "It's a room in a shared house, nothing fancy, but the rent is reasonable and it's close to downtown." The house turned out to be a slightly run-down Victorian divided into 5 bedrooms with shared common areas. My roommates were an eclectic group: Grace, a barista and part-time student; Kevin, a line cook with aspirations of opening his own restaurant; Zoe, a perpetually touring musician who was rarely home; and Eduardo, a soft-spoken nurse who worked night shifts. My room was the smallest, tucked under the eaves on the 3rd floor with barely enough space for a twin bed and a small desk, but it was mine. I moved in with my meager possessions, clothes, laptop, and a few personal items I'd managed to grab during my hasty Christmas exit. "Welcome to the island of misfit toys," Kevin announced when I arrived with my single suitcase. "House meeting is Sunday nights, cleaning rotation is on the fridge, and we have a strict replace what you use policy for communal items." Despite the casual greeting, I soon discovered that my new roommates were a supportive bunch. Grace, a graphic design student herself, offered to help update my portfolio website. "Your work is solid, but your presentation needs polish," she said bluntly as we sat at the kitchen table one evening. "Let me show you how to showcase it better." Over several nights, we rebuilt my online presence, a more professional website, an updated LinkedIn profile, and a curated Instagram feed highlighting my best designs. Grace even took new headshots of me in the backyard, coaching me through poses until I looked both approachable and professional. "The job market is brutal," she acknowledged as we reviewed the final results, "but you've got talent. You just need to package it right." Living in the shared house required extreme budgeting. My portion of rent and utilities consumed most of my irregular income, leaving little for anything else. I learned to cook with whatever was on sale, became an expert at finding free entertainment, and embraced thrift store fashion out of necessity. Every morning I still checked my email for job opportunities and sent out applications. Every afternoon I worked on freelance projects at the local library or coffee shop. Every evening I delivered food or walked dogs or did whatever odd jobs I could find to supplement my income. The relentless hustle was exhausting, but there was something empowering about surviving on my own terms. No one was supporting me, but no one was calling me a leech either. Each dollar I earned felt like a small victory against my father's damning assessment. But the psychological toll of that Christmas night lingered. In quiet moments I still heard his voice: "Disappointment, failure, Leech." I would catch myself hesitating before buying even necessities, wondering if I deserved them. The anxiety about money became a constant companion, waking me at night with calculations and worst-case scenarios. After particularly difficult days, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever feel secure again. The precarious of my situation was a weight I carried everywhere. My brother Trevor texted occasionally awkward messages asking how I was doing or sharing random updates about school. I responded with equal awkwardness, neither of us acknowledging the elephant in the room. There was no contact from my father or Diane. Aunt Jessica called weekly, offering encouragement and occasionally sending small amounts of money that I increasingly refused. "I'm managing," I told her during one call. "Save it for your own rainy day." "Your mother would be so proud of you," she replied. "You know that, right? The way you're handling this, she would be incredibly proud." Those words were a balm to the wound my father had inflicted. I clung to them on my darkest days. In early March, something unexpected happened. I was having coffee with Grace when she introduced me to her friend Samantha, who stopped by our table. "Samantha owns Firefly Design," Grace explained. "They do branding for small businesses. We're actually looking for some freelance help," Samantha mentioned casually. "One of our designers is going on maternity leave next month. Nothing full-time, but steady work for the right person." I tried to contain my excitement as I handed over my newly redesigned business card. "I'd love to talk more about it." 2 days later, I was sitting in Firefly's small but stylish office, showing Samantha my portfolio and trying not to appear desperate. "Your work has personality," she observed, lingering on a rebrand I'd done for a local bookstore. "A lot of junior designers play it safe, but you take interesting risks." The following week, I started picking up regular projects from Firefly, approximately 20 hours of work per week at a rate that was double what I'd been making from my hodgepodge of freelance gigs. It wasn't full-time employment with benefits, but it was consistent income doing what I loved. For the first time since Christmas, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps my father had been wrong about me after all. Perhaps I wasn't a leech or a failure. Perhaps I was simply a young woman navigating a difficult time with whatever resources she had available. One evening in April, as spring finally began to soften the harsh winter, I sat on the rickety porch of our shared house with Kevin and Grace, sharing a cheap bottle of wine and watching the sunset. To survival, Kevin toasted, raising his plastic cup, and figuring shit out as we go. I clinked my cup against his, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face, perhaps the first real one since that fateful Christmas dinner. "To figuring shit out," I echoed, and in that moment I realized I was doing exactly that. By the 3-month mark after Christmas, a subtle but significant shift had occurred in my life. The paralysis of those first homeless weeks had given way to a focused determination that surprised even me. My survival was no longer in question. I had shelter, food, and work. Now I could begin thinking beyond mere existence. My relationship with Firefly Design deepened as Samantha entrusted me with increasingly important projects. What had started as 20 hours of work per week gradually expanded to 30, then nearly full-time. "You've got a good eye for local businesses," Samantha observed one afternoon as we reviewed my concept for a neighborhood bakery's rebrand. "You understand their personality, what makes them unique." Her comment sparked a realization. While applying to corporate design positions, I'd been ignoring a potential niche. Small local businesses often couldn't afford large agencies but still needed professional branding. They were exactly the clients I connected with best. I began focusing my independent freelance work exclusively on small businesses. The family-owned hardware store that had been using the same logo since 1978, the new food truck needing complete branding on a tight budget, the local jewelry maker wanting to establish an online presence. These clients didn't pay corporate rates, but they were loyal, appreciative, and generated consistent word-of-mouth referrals. Between my work at Firefly and my growing roster of small business clients, I was finally earning enough to breathe a little easier. I opened a savings account, depositing a small amount each week, my first step toward financial security. My roommate Grace continued to be an unexpected mentor, pushing me to develop new skills that expanded my marketability. "You need to learn UX design," she insisted one weekend, showing me a free online course. "The pay is better and there's huge demand. I'll help you build a portfolio." I spent evenings and weekends absorbing everything I could about user experience design, website development, and digital marketing. The library became my second home as I worked through tutorials, built practice projects, and earned free online certifications. Samantha noticed my expanding skill set. "We've been thinking about offering website development to our clients," she mentioned casually. "Most of them need it, but we've been outsourcing it. Interested in heading up that service?" The opportunity terrified and excited me in equal measure. I had the basic skills but wasn't an expert. Still, I recognized the chance for what it was. "I'd need to level up my coding knowledge," I replied honestly. "But yes, I'd love to take that on." "Good," she nodded, "because I already told a client you'd be building their site. Deadlines in 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks were a crash course in web development, late nights, countless YouTube tutorials, and several panic attacks when the code wouldn't work. But when I finally presented the finished website to the client, their enthusiastic approval made the struggle worthwhile. As my professional life stabilized, I knew I needed to address my emotional health as well. The wound of my father's rejection remained raw, affecting my self-confidence and relationships. When Grace mentioned a community counseling center that offered therapy on a sliding scale, I finally acknowledged that I needed help processing what had happened. My therapist, Elena, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that reminded me a little of Melissa. "What your father did was emotional abuse," she stated plainly in our second session. "His words were designed to hurt and control you." I bristled at the term abuse. He was just frustrated. I was living in his house, not contributing financially. "Would you say that to a friend in your situation?" Elena interrupted gently. "If someone told you their father had called them a leech and thrown them out on Christmas night, would you think that was an appropriate response to temporary financial hardship?" Her question stopped me short. Put that way, my father's actions seemed undeniably cruel. Our weekly sessions became a safe space to examine not just the Christmas incident, but the patterns of criticism and conditional love that had shaped my childhood. I began to recognize how I'd internalized my father's voice, becoming my own harshest critic. "Notice when that inner voice starts criticizing you," Elena suggested. "Ask yourself, is this my voice or my father's? Would I speak to someone I love this way?" This simple practice began to transform my self-talk. When the familiar thoughts arose, "You're not good enough," "You're a failure," "You're a burden," I could recognize them as echoes of my father rather than objective truth. By the 6-month mark after Christmas, I had saved enough to move out of the shared house into a small studio apartment of my own. It was a third-floor walk-up in an older building with questionable plumbing, but it was mine alone, a luxury I hadn't thought possible just months earlier. The day I signed the lease, I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. From homeless to homeowner, well, renter in half a year, not a path I would have chosen, but one I had navigated nonetheless. My IKEA furniture was supplemented with thrift store finds and curbside treasures that my roommates helped me refinish. The resulting eclectic style suited me better than the sterile perfection of my father's house ever had. As summer arrived, Samantha called me into her office for an unexpected conversation. "The team loves your work," she began, "and that website development service you started is bringing in new clients. I'd like to offer you a full-time position, creative director for digital services, salary, benefits, the works." I sat in stunned silence, processing her words. Creative director, benefits, security. "I know it's not a corporate salary," she continued, misinterpreting my silence, "but there's room for growth." "It's perfect," I interrupted, "absolutely perfect." That evening I celebrated by ordering takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself in months, and calling Aunt Jessica with the news. "I knew you'd land on your feet," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother always said you had her determination." The mention of my mother sparked a familiar ache, but now it was tinged with something new, pride that I was carrying forward her strength. As my professional life flourished, I began cautiously rebuilding a social circle as well. I joined a local design meetup group, volunteered my skills for a community garden project, and even went on a few dates, though none progressed to anything serious. What surprised me most was how my perspective on success had shifted. Before the Christmas disaster, I had measured achievement in conventional terms: prestigious job titles, salary levels, material possessions. Now, independence and self-sufficiency were my primary metrics. The ability to pay my bills, save for emergencies, and help others when I could. These became my new definition of success. In late June, an unexpected text arrived from my brother Trevor. "Can we meet for coffee? Need to talk." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a cafe downtown where I often worked. Trevor arrived looking uncomfortable in the artsy environment, his athletic build and preppy clothes marking him as out of place among the tattooed baristas and laptop-focused patrons. "This is weird," he admitted after we'd ordered and found a quiet corner. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" I asked, unsure of his intentions. "Talk to you about what happened." He stared into his coffee. "Dad was wrong what he did. I should have said something that night, but I froze." His unexpected acknowledgement cracked something open inside me. "You were 17, Trevor. It wasn't your responsibility to stand up to him." Still, he insisted. "I'm sorry, and I've missed you. The house is different without you." We talked for nearly 2 hours, cautiously at first, then with increasing openness. He shared that our father's business was struggling, adding financial stress to an already tense household. Diane had taken a part-time job to help with expenses, disrupting her carefully maintained image of affluent domesticity. "Dad never talks about you," Trevor confided, "but sometimes I catch him looking at your old graduation photo when he thinks no one's watching." I wasn't ready to forgive my father, but I was grateful to reconnect with my brother. We agreed to meet monthly, keeping our relationship separate from the wider family dynamics for now. As we parted, Trevor hesitated, then pulled me into an awkward hug. "You're doing better than all of us," he whispered, "just so you know." His words stayed with me, a validation I hadn't realized I was seeking. 6 months after being cast out as a failure, I had built a life that was authentically mine. Not perfect, not without struggle, but grounded in self-reliance and true to my values. That night, standing in my tiny studio apartment, I looked at the vision board I'd created during a therapy exercise: images of financial security, creative fulfillment, healthy relationships, and personal growth. For the first time, these goals didn't seem like distant fantasies but achievable realities. I was no longer simply surviving, I was beginning to thrive. The seasons turned, and before I knew it, a full year had passed since that fateful Christmas dinner. The anniversary brought mixed emotions: pride in how far I'd come, lingering pain over my father's rejection, and a strange nostalgia for the person I had been before, blissfully unaware of how quickly security could vanish. My career continued to flourish. The digital services department I led at Firefly Design had grown from a one-woman operation to a 3-person team, with me overseeing 2 junior designers. My salary had increased accordingly, allowing me to build a modest emergency fund and even start contributing to a retirement account. Adult achievements that felt significant after my period of homelessness. I had settled into my studio apartment, making it truly mine, with carefully chosen artwork, plants that somehow survived my inconsistent care, and a comfortable workspace that doubled as a dining area. It wasn't spacious or luxurious, but it felt like home in a way my father's house never had. My relationship with Trevor had strengthened through our monthly coffee meetings, evolving from awkward catch-ups to genuine siblinghood. He was now a freshman at State University, studying business like our father but beginning to question that path. "I'm not sure it's what I actually want," he confided during one of our meetings. "I just never considered anything else was possible." I recognized in him the same struggle I'd faced separating our father's expectations from our own desires. The difference was that Trevor was confronting this question at 19, not 26 after a crisis. It was during one of these coffee dates in early December that Trevor dropped a bombshell. "Aunt Jessica is hosting Easter dinner this year," he mentioned casually. "She wants you to come." I nearly choked on my latte. Easter, that's months away, and who else would be there? Trevor's expression confirmed my suspicion. "Everyone, Dad, Diane, extended family. But Aunt Jessica says it's her house, her rules, and she wants both her nieces there." The prospect of facing my father after all this time sent a wave of anxiety through me. I had carefully constructed a life without him, processing my feelings about his rejection in therapy but never directly confronting the source of that pain. "I'll think about it," I told Trevor noncommittally. That evening I called Aunt Jessica. "Are you sure this is a good idea? Dad and I in the same room after everything that happened?" "No, I'm not sure at all," she replied with her characteristic honesty, "but I'm sure that this estrangement is causing pain to everyone involved, including you. Sometimes the only way past something is through it." I brought the dilemma to my next therapy session with Elena. "What do you hope might happen if you attend?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. Closure maybe, not reconciliation necessarily, but, I don't know, a chance to show him I survived without him, that I'm not what he called me. "That sounds like unfinished business," Elena observed, "but ask yourself this: if he doesn't give you the response you're hoping for, if he doesn't acknowledge the hurt he caused or recognize your growth, will you regret going?" It was a powerful question that I pondered for weeks. Eventually, I realized that my decision couldn't depend on my father's reaction. I needed to attend for myself, to face the source of my deepest wound and prove primarily to myself that it no longer defined me. I texted Trevor my decision in January: "Tell Aunt Jessica I'll be there for Easter." The months leading up to Easter were filled with preparation, not just logistical but emotional. In therapy, I role-played difficult conversations, practiced setting boundaries, and developed strategies for managing anxiety. With Samantha's blessing, I even took a few days off work before the gathering to ensure I was well-rested and centered. Easter Sunday arrived with picture-perfect spring weather, sunshine, gentle breeze, and flowering trees that seemed oblivious to the emotional storm brewing in my chest. I selected my outfit with deliberate care: a professional dress in a flattering color, subtle makeup, and the silver earrings that had been my mother's. I wanted to project confidence and success without seeming like I was trying too hard. Driving to Aunt Jessica's suburban home, I rehearsed the grounding techniques Elena had taught me. 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. The simple exercise helped anchor me in the present rather than catastrophizing about the upcoming encounter. Aunt Jessica greeted me at the door with a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you for coming," she whispered before leading me into the living room where the family had gathered. The conversation paused as I entered. Uncle Paul smiled warmly, cousins Rachel and Ryan offered awkward waves, then Trevor gave me an encouraging nod. My father sat in an armchair by the fireplace, his posture stiff and expression unreadable. Diane stood nearby, looking uncomfortable. Amber, my father acknowledged with a slight nod, as if we'd seen each other last week rather than over a year ago, as if he hadn't called me a leech and thrown me out on Christmas night. "Dad," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Diane." An awkward silence descended until Aunt Jessica clapped her hands. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Drinks on the patio until then." The gathering proceeded with strained politeness, everyone carefully avoiding any mention of the Christmas incident or the year-long estrangement. I made conversation with my cousins about their jobs and relationships, caught up with Uncle Paul about his construction business, and helped Aunt Jessica bring dishes to the table. My father maintained a careful distance, engaging primarily with Trevor and Uncle Paul while occasionally glancing in my direction when he thought I wasn't looking. I caught Diane studying me with curious eyes, perhaps noting the changes in my appearance and demeanor since she'd last seen me. It was during dinner, as we passed serving dishes around the table, that my father finally addressed me directly. "Trevor mentions you're working at a design firm now," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Creative director," he said. "Yes," I confirmed, "for their digital services department." "Good," he nodded, "that's good." And then, as if this minimal acknowledgement had fulfilled some obligation, he turned to discuss the upcoming football season with Uncle Paul. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced throughout my childhood when my achievements were acknowledged but not celebrated, noted but not valued. For a moment I considered letting it pass as I always had, keeping the peace by swallowing my feelings. But I was no longer that person. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the table conversation, it is good. I built that department from nothing after spending a month homeless, after sleeping in my car through January because you threw me out on Christmas night. The table fell silent. My father's face reddened. Amber, Diane started, this isn't the time. When would be the time? I asked calmly. It's been over a year and no one has acknowledged what happened. You called me a leech and a disappointment in front of our entire family. You said Mom would be ashamed of me, then made me homeless on Christmas night. My father shifted uncomfortably. You're exaggerating. I gave you until New Year's. No, you didn't, Trevor interrupted unexpectedly. You said that night. I was there. My father looked betrayed by Trevor's correction. You were going through a rough patch, he said defensively. Sometimes people need a push too. A push, I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You shattered my self-worth. You took away my safety net when I was already at my lowest point. That wasn't a push, Dad, it was a shove off a cliff. Aunt Jessica reached over to squeeze my hand supportively. The touch grounded me, helping me continue with the speech I'd rehearsed countless times. I'm not here for an apology, I said, my voice steadying. I'm here because I needed you to see me, really see me. I survived what you did. More than survived, I've thrived. Not because of your tough love, but despite it. I built a career, a home, and a support system from nothing. I discovered my own strength not because you believed in me, but because you didn't. My father stared at his plate, jaw working. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Diane surprisingly broke it. He was wrong, she said quietly. We both were. The things that were said that night, they weren't right. My father shot her a look of surprise and what might have been betrayal. The economy was different when you were young, Richard, she continued, addressing my father, and you had your parents' support through college. Your father paid your first apartment's security deposit. You didn't do it all on your own either. It was perhaps the first time I'd ever heard Diane contradict my father, and certainly the first time she'd ever sided with me against. My father's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally a reluctant contemplation. I was harsh, he conceded eventually, though the words seemed physically painful for him to speak. But I stand by the principle. Adults need to support themselves. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even a full acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused, but it was perhaps as much as he was capable of offering. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. I agree that adults should support themselves. And that's exactly what I've done without your help, because you gave me no choice. But there's a difference between encouraging independence and abandoning someone when they're down. The remainder of the meal passed in subdued conversation. My father said little, seemingly processing our exchange. As the gathering wound down, I helped Aunt Jessica clear the table and load the dishwasher, feeling lighter than I had in months. As I prepared to leave, my father approached me in the hallway, his expression uncomfortable but determined. You've done well for yourself, he said stiffly. Your mother would be pleased. It wasn't the emotional reconciliation that movies might have portrayed. There were no tears, no dramatic embraces, just a small acknowledgement that fell far short of what I deserved but represented a significant concession from a man who rarely admitted being wrong. Thank you, I replied simply. Outside, Aunt Jessica followed me to my car. Are you okay? She asked, studying my face in the fading light. Yes, I realized with some surprise. Actually, I am. That went exactly as it needed to. She smiled, understanding what I meant. Will you come to family gatherings now? I considered the question on my terms. Not every holiday, not if it doesn't feel right, but I won't stay away out of fear anymore. Driving home, I felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest. Not happiness exactly, not relief, but something more profound, a sense of having reclaimed something essential that had been taken from me. Not my father's approval, which I now recognized I might never fully receive, but my own power. I had faced my deepest fear and greatest hurt. I had spoken my truth without collapsing, without needing validation or apology in return. The cycle of seeking his approval, of measuring my worth through his eyes, had finally been broken. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, I realized that this confrontation hadn't given me the fairy tale ending part of me had secretly hoped for. My father hadn't broken down in remorse or suddenly transformed into the supportive parent I'd always wanted. But perhaps the real resolution wasn't about changing him at all. It was about changing how I allowed his opinions to affect me. about recognizing that I could acknowledge the pain he'd caused without letting it define my future. That night, I called Melissa, the waitress who had offered me shelter during my darkest days and who had since become a dear friend, to share what had happened. "So no tearful reconciliation?" she asked after I recounted the confrontation. "No," I laughed softly, "just clarity, and maybe the beginning of something new." "Sometimes that's better," she replied wisely. "Clean edges heal faster than messy ones." As I fell asleep that night, I realized that the confrontation had provided something I hadn't anticipated, not closure exactly, that suggested an ending, and my relationship with my father, however limited, would continue in some form. Rather, it had created an opening, a space for something new to grow in place of the festering wound that had occupied that space for the past year. What would fill that space remained to be seen, but for the first time I felt fully ready to find out. 18 months after that life-changing Christmas dinner, I stood in the center of my new apartment, a proper one-bedroom with large windows, wood floors, and enough space for both living and working comfortably. Boxes surrounded me, most still sealed, waiting to transform this empty space into home. This move represented more than a change of address. It marked a milestone in my journey from homelessness to self-sufficiency. I could now afford this place on my own, without roommates or financial assistance. The lease bore only my name, a simple fact that filled me with quiet pride. The journey to this moment had not been linear. After the Easter confrontation with my father, our relationship had evolved into something I would describe as civil but distant. We saw each other at occasional family gatherings, exchanged perfunctory birthday and Christmas gifts, and maintained a careful politeness that acknowledged our shared history without truly addressing it. He never apologized properly for what happened that Christmas night. I eventually stopped expecting him to. Instead, I focused on building the parts of my life that brought fulfillment and joy. My career continued to flourish. The digital department I led at Firefly Design had become the fastest-growing segment of the business, attracting clients who specifically requested me by name. Samantha had recently promoted me to partner, giving me an ownership stake in the company alongside a significant raise. "You've transformed this business," she told me during the meeting where she offered the partnership. "You deserve to own a piece of what you've built." Financial security, once an elusive dream, had become my reality. I maintained a 6-month emergency fund, contributed regularly to retirement accounts, and even had savings earmarked for future goals. The constant anxiety about money that had plagued me after becoming homeless had gradually subsided, replaced by confidence in my ability to provide for myself regardless of circumstances. My therapy sessions with Elena had decreased from weekly to monthly, focused now on maintaining mental health rather than healing acute trauma. The work we'd done together had helped me recognize and rewire the negative thought patterns instilled by my father's criticism. "You've developed remarkable resilience," Elena observed during a recent session, "not just the ability to withstand hardship, but to grow from it." Perhaps the most unexpected development in my post-Christmas life was my relationship with Michael, a web developer I'd met through a professional networking event. After years of choosing partners who reinforced my insecurities, critical men who resembled my father in subtle ways, Michael's kindness and emotional intelligence initially made me suspicious. "You're waiting for the other shoe to drop," Elena had noted when I first mentioned my discomfort with his consistent support, "because consistent support isn't familiar to you." Gradually, I learned to accept his kindness without questioning whether I deserved it. Our relationship progressed naturally from professional colleagues to friends to something deeper. Now, after 8 months together, he was helping me unpack boxes in my new apartment, arguing good-naturedly about where furniture should go. "The desk needs to be by the window," he insisted, pushing the heavy wooden piece across the floor. "Natural light is essential for creativity." I smiled, watching him arrange my workspace with the same care he'd take with his own. "You just want me to have a good view when I'm on video calls with you." "That too," he admitted with a grin. As we unpacked, I came across a box labeled "Old Stuff" in Melissa's handwriting. Inside were the few possessions I'd had during those first desperate weeks of homelessness, clothes I'd hurriedly packed that Christmas night, my portfolio, and a small photo of my mother that had always traveled with me. Beneath these items lay something unexpected: the $500 bills Aunt Jessica had pressed into my hand as I left my father's house. I'd forgotten that I'd saved them, unable to spend this last gift even during my most desperate moment. "What's that?" Michael asked, noticing my stillness. "The money that kept me from complete destitution," I explained, showing him the cash. "Aunt Jessica gave it to me the night I left. I could never bring myself to spend it." "What will you do with it now?" I considered the question, turning the bills over in my hand. They represented both crisis and salvation, a reminder of how quickly life could change and how essential community could be in those moments of change. I think I'll start a fund, I decided, for someone else who needs emergency help, pay it forward, like Melissa did for me. That evening after Michael left, I stood on my small balcony overlooking the city lights. The night was warm, the sky clear enough to see a few persistent stars despite the urban glow. I thought about the constellation of people who had helped me navigate my darkest time: Aunt Jessica with her unwavering support, Melissa with her generous spirit, Grace and Kevin with their practical assistance, Samantha with her professional mentorship, Elena with her psychological insights, and now Michael with his steady presence. I had learned that family could be chosen as well as inherited. The people who had sustained me through my crisis weren't bound to me by blood but by something perhaps more meaningful: the conscious choice to care, to help, to remain present during difficulty. My relationship with my blood family had shifted into a new configuration. Trevor and I had grown closer through the ordeal, our monthly coffee meetings evolving into genuine friendship. He had recently confided his decision to switch majors from business to education, inspired partly by my courage to forge my own path. "Dad's not happy," he admitted, "but I realized something watching you this past year. His approval isn't worth sacrificing my own happiness." Aunt Jessica remained my strongest family connection, our bond deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. She had recently started dating again after years alone following Uncle Paul's passing from a sudden heart attack 6 months ago. "Life's too short to waste on regrets," she told me over lunch recently. "Your mother knew that. It's why she packed so much living into her brief time." Even Diane had shown unexpected dimensions. After the Easter confrontation, she had reached out independently, inviting me to coffee in what became an awkward but sincere attempt to rebuild some kind of relationship. "I wasn't kind to you after your mother died," she acknowledged during that meeting. "I was insecure, threatened by the history you represented. It wasn't fair to you." The most complex relationship remained with my father. The harsh words of that Christmas dinner had left scars that would never completely fade. Yet time and distance had given me perspective on his limitations: a man trapped in rigid thinking, unable to adapt to changing circumstances or admit vulnerability. During our most recent encounter at Trevor's birthday dinner, I'd noticed something I hadn't seen before: a certain fragility beneath my father's authoritative exterior. His business was struggling in the changing economy, his health showing signs of his advancing age, his worldview increasingly out of step with the times. For the first time I felt something approaching compassion for him, not because he deserved it but because I was now strong enough to offer it. As I unpacked my new apartment over the following days, I realized I was arranging more than furniture. I was creating a physical manifestation of the internal work I'd done, a space that reflected who I had become rather than who I had been. On the wall above my desk, I hung a simple framed quotation that had guided me through the darkest moments of the past 18 months. "Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life." I'd stumbled across the words during those long hours at the public library, and they had resonated with a truth I was just beginning to understand. That Christmas night when my father had called me a leech and ordered me out of his house had indeed been my rock bottom. The ground beneath my feet had crumbled, leaving me in free fall. But in that painful descent, I had discovered resources within myself I never knew existed: resilience, determination, creativity, and the courage to accept help when needed. The person I had become was not who I would have chosen to be if given an easier path, but she was stronger, wiser, and more authentic than the woman who had sat at that Christmas table 18 months ago, seeking approval she would never receive. On the weekend after moving in, I hosted my first dinner party, a small gathering of the people who had supported me through my transformation: Melissa and her new boyfriend, Grace and Kevin from the shared house, Samantha and her husband, and Michael, of course. And Jessica came too, bringing a houseplant as a traditional blessing for new beginnings. As we sat around my table, mismatched chairs, second-hand dishes, abundant food, I looked at the faces of my chosen family and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it momentarily took my breath away. "I want to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass, "to unexpected journeys and the people who help us navigate them." "And to rock bottoms," Melissa added with a knowing smile that turned out to be foundations. Later that night, after everyone had gone and I was alone in my new space, I opened my laptop to check email before bed. Among the usual work messages was an unexpected name: my father's. The subject line read simply, "Your mother's birthday." I hesitated before opening it, bracing for criticism or obligation. Instead, I found a brief message and an attachment. Found this while cleaning the attic. Thought you should have it. Your mother would be proud of who you've become. In some ways I am too. The attachment was a photo I'd never seen before, my mother holding me as an infant, her face radiant with a joy I barely remembered seeing. Something about the image, or perhaps the unexpected acknowledgement in my father's message, brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't the dramatic reconciliation of movie endings. It wasn't even perhaps the beginning of a healed relationship, but it was an acknowledgement of my worth, of my mother's legacy, of the truth that had sustained me through my darkest days. I was more than his harsh judgment of me. As I prepared for bed in my new home, I thought about how far I had come from that Christmas night, not just in circumstances but in self-understanding. My father's cruel words had once shattered me, but they no longer defined me. I had rebuilt myself from those broken pieces, creating something stronger and more beautiful than before. The journey from Leech to leader, from rejection to self-acceptance, from homelessness to home had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. But one truth had emerged with crystal clarity: sometimes being forced to leave is the first step toward finding where you truly belong. Has your family ever let you down in a way that ultimately made you stronger? Have you experienced a rock bottom that became your foundation? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their current struggles can become future strength. Thank you for being part of my healing by witnessing my story. Remember, sometimes the hardest chapters led to the most beautiful beginnings.